Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to Functional Skills English after your lovely Christmas break. As always, we are starting off with our 5-a-day warm-up questions. So I would suggest you pause the video at this point and give yourself around 5 minutes to have a go at these questions before listening to the answers. So please pause the video now. Okay, so answers. Let's look at question 1. So the correct spelling of the word conflict is spelling number 2. And question 2, what does this actually mean? Well, conflict is essentially it is an argument or a disagreement of some kind, usually about beliefs or opinions. But it can take place between just two people, two individuals. It can take place between groups of people. Think about all the protests and things that have happened in the past year. That's a good example. But it can even take place between countries and nations. So where war occurs, so things like World War I and II are often referred to as conflicts. And conflicts can often take place over a period of time. They're not sort of very quick and instant. It's usually something that happens over a period of time. Conflict is going to be the sort of the background theme for today's session. The main thing that we're going to focus on, the main sort of skill that we're going to focus on in today's lesson is about language techniques. So when we say language techniques, we're thinking about, the things that a writer does on purpose within their writing, within their sentences. And each of these sorts of techniques, they have special names. So I'd like you to have a look at this sentence here. Why would you want to leave? Well, there's a question mark at the end, so that is a good clue that we are looking at a rhetorical question, which is the name of the technique being used. But there is also something else going on here where the writer is using the word you. So the writer is in fact speaking directly to their audience, which is another technique that they have sort of combined together with the rhetorical question here. Number 4, we need to edit the sentence. I is very tired after college this week, but I didn't sleep in at the weekend. Definitely some things that need to change here. The first thing you probably heard when I said that out loud was to do with the first part, I is. When we need to match up in a sentence, we always need to match up the person and the verb correctly. Now, if I was talking about he or she or it, the verb is fine. But when we use the subject, when we use the word I to talk about ourselves, we can't use is. So that needs to change to I am very tired after college this week. We now also need to think a bit about punctuation. Most of you may have spotted at the end of the sentence, it's not quite right. We've got a comma, when in fact we actually need a full stop. We can't use a comma to end a sentence. So we need something appropriate instead, and a full stop is the punctuation to do the job. However, that's not the only bit of punctuation that's not quite right in this sentence. We are in fact looking at a compound sentence where we've got two smaller sentences that we're trying to join together. So both of these sentences, these little parts, could work on their own as very small sentences, but we're joining them together with a joining word, also known as a conjunction, but. And the word but, the joining word in the middle, also requires us to use a comma. However, a comma should go before the joining word, not afterwards. So if anyone spotted that, well done. Last but not least then, question 5. What is another word for disagreement? So disagreement, we've already used words such as conflict and argument today, and they would both work when we are talking about disagreement. So well done on your 5-a-day warm-up questions there. Hopefully you're ready to rock and roll for today's lesson. We are focusing in on those language techniques. We've talked about them previously at the start of the academic year. We have talked about these when we were focusing on our writing and trying to use some of them within our writing when we're trying to be persuasive or informative. And we've used a range of them across that time. But that's not the only time in our functional skills qualification that we need to know about them. We also need to be able to pick out and identify language techniques within other people's writing. So when we come to tackling the reading side of things, those of you at level 1 and level 2, you will be expected to recognize and even identify different language techniques within a text. For those of you at entry level, particularly entry level 3, you wouldn't necessarily be asked to recognize the language techniques, but it is very good to know about them and to pick up on them, because it can help you with another area, purpose. So at all levels, entry 3 to level 2, you need to be able to recognize the purpose of a text, so why the writer has written it. And if we get a bit of an understanding of some of these techniques, it can really help us to understand what the writer was trying to do and help us to work out what that purpose is. So today's plan of action then, we're going to sort of try and remember as many of those language techniques as we can. And we're going to sort of make sure that we're familiar with them, that we're happy with them. We're going to try and, recognize some of those in different situations, some of them in a text, some of them in different sentences. And last but not least, we're going to try and pull those together and use some in our own writing. So that is our plan of action for today's lesson. So for those of you that are catching up on this lesson after this week, the in-class students would have been writing all over the screen and in the chat and sharing different ideas of techniques that they can remember. So it's over to you now to pause the video and give yourself a minute to remember as many techniques as you can. So please pause the video now and write down as many as you can recall. Okay, so in class we would have talked through the different suggestions, the different ideas that had been shared. Lots of different techniques, are out there in the world, and a lot of them do link to things like descriptions and storytelling and poems and things when we want to be really, really descriptive or write in a narrative kind of way. These don't come into functional skills as much. We do still come across descriptions, but not very often, not compared to persuasive or informative texts. So the language techniques that we're going to focus on in today's session are key common techniques that come up again and again and again in persuasive and informative texts. And they are the kind of techniques that we should also be using in our writing. I just want to reiterate, there is a difference between layout and language. So when we talk about layout, we are talking about the structure of a text. We're talking about the sections or parts that we can see on the page, such as headings and paragraphs. That is layout, not language. Today, we are focusing on language. So we are looking at sort of individual sort of sentences and phrases, and we're looking at what the writer is doing on purpose within that small chunk. Okay, what sorts of techniques they are using there. So at this stage, there is a quiz that you can do on Learn, and the link will be on your reading task. It will be in the Learn folder. You can access it from there. And it will be on the PowerPoint slide as well. And you can practice matching up explanations of what these techniques are to some of the common ones. I'm going to go through them here now, just to make sure you're happy and familiar with them. So one way of remembering them is to call them fear techniques. You may have heard of other techniques, sort of words like deforest, to try and remember them. But this is just a nice, straightforward way of remembering, some of those techniques. So each of the letters in this word here, fear, each stand for a technique that we could use. So F stands for facts and statistics. Facts are something that we can prove to be true. We've got evidence or some kind of research or something that we can use to prove that something has happened or is real. Statistics are a kind of fact, but they rely on numbers. So they might use a number to show how, a quantity of something. They might use a percentage or a probability to show something to you. E is for emotive language, words that use emotions or feelings. So emotive links to that word emotions. This could be direct. We might see words used such as happy or sad, so it's very clear that the writer is talking about feelings. But sometimes it is actually a lot more subtle. In the thing, they might be talking about a particular topic in a certain way to make the reader feel. So it might be that they try and make the reader feel really sad and upset. It might be that they try and make the reader feel really guilty about something to try and get them, to persuade them to do something. Another E for you is exaggeration. Another way of calling that is hyperbole. You may have heard the word hyperbole before, and that simply means exaggeration. So when we are making something seem much better or worse than it really is, and again, it's very persuasive, that technique. A, addressing the audience or direct address. We did mention this earlier in the 5 a day, didn't we? So where the writer uses the words you or your to sort of create that one-to-one kind of almost relationship or conversation with the reader. Alliteration, so we have several words and they might begin with the same sound or letter within the sentence because it stands out a little bit more. It's quite memorable, quite catchy when a writer does that. R, repetition. So it might be that you see a word repeated within the same sentence, but not often. Repetition is more sort of seen across an entire text. So a particular word or a particular phrase or even an idea might get repeated again and again throughout the text. The speaker might keep coming back to it to really emphasize it to you. Rule of 3 is another one that we see quite often in persuasive texts. So we'll find 3 things sort of together within a sentence. We'll see the commas to separate them, like a list almost. But again, it's quite memorable, it's quite catchy. For some sort of reason, 3 sticks in our mind. So when we hear 3 things, our minds sort of remember it that bit better. Last but not least, then, rhetorical questions. Again, we've already spoken about rhetorical questions in the 5 a day. It's that kind of question that doesn't really need a proper answer. It's more to get people thinking about things from a certain view or direction. So again, this is not the end of the world. This is not the be all and end all. There are plenty of other techniques out there in the world that a writer might use. And you might see some of them in the kinds of texts that we're going to deal with across our sort of reading unit. But the ones that we just talked about are sort of the more common ones, the ones that you are more likely to see and to need to deal with. A couple of other things you might want to know. Sometimes we see a writer use flattery. So when you flatter someone, you compliment them and you say nice things about them to make them feel good about themselves. Again, very persuasive. Generally speaking, we can also talk about positive and negative language. So we might notice that the writer is talking about their topic and using positive and negative words to do so. We can definitely talk about that in an exam situation. And again, sometimes writers can be very bossy. They can be telling you what to do. So they might use commanding words or verbs to boss you about. And that's a good clue that they are instructing or advising you. So we're going to start, trying to pull this out ourselves. What we have got in your Learn folders is this text, this document here, and it says Recognising Language Techniques Group Task. In lesson, this would have been done as a group in breakout rooms, and we would have been discussing and working out what each of these examples actually is. So each of these sentences is using at least one language technique that we've just talked about. Some of them might in fact be using more than one and combining them together. Underneath is a list of the potential techniques it could be, but it might not be all of them. So take a few minutes now, please pause the video, give yourself some time to work out, if you can, what techniques are being used in each of these sentences, and then we'll go through them all together. So when you're ready, we will go through the examples. So number one, what more could be done, is an example of a rhetorical question. Good clue is the question mark. Many workplaces reported that conflict was a contributing factor to employees leaving. Well, this comes across to me as a fact. The word reported kind of suggests that someone somewhere was gathering evidence. They were finding out information from these employees. Maybe they were interviewing them or something, and they've managed to gather evidence to prove that this was the factor that was involved in them leaving. Next one, 2 in 5 people experience conflict at work. Well, that 2 in 5 part, that's numbers, isn't it? It's a statistic. War conflicts can lead to death, decay, and destruction. This one's interesting. Some people in class suggested that this could arguably be a fact, but the key ones here is the death, decay, and destruction part. We've got 3 bits, and they also use the same sound. So it's kind of combined alliteration to the d sound. And we've got 3 things as well. So both together in one. Next one, we've got a rhetorical question mark there, but also it uses the word you. So it is talking directly to the audience. So again, it is an example of direct address as well. Conflict can leave people feeling helpless and vulnerable. Quite straightforward there. We've got the words feeling and helpless and vulnerable, which links to feelings and emotions, doesn't it? So we would say emotive language for that one. 82% of families separated during wars never find them again. Straight away, 82%, the percentage there suggests this is a statistic, but potentially it could also be quite emotional, couldn't it? If we're thinking about families that are being separated, they're never going to see each other again, that could make some people feel quite upset. So it could also be emotive language. You may have experienced conflict at home, work, and college. Straight away, the first word you creates that relationship between the reader and the writer, that direct address. But at the other end, we've got 3 things together: home, work, college, rule of 3. Last but not least then, is there nowhere free from conflict? A rhetorical question. That's quite a tough activity, guys, especially if you're doing it on your own. So well done for tackling that one. It is difficult, and we're not going to get there straight away all the time, but we do need to practice recognizing the different things that are going on. So your next step, if you click the link in the PowerPoint, you won't be able to do it from the video, but if you click the link in the PowerPoint, this will take you to an activity on Learn. If Learn asks you to log in, use the OpenID Connect button. Do not use the normal login, it doesn't behave. So please use the OpenID Connect button, the one that's purple with the sort of orange square on it, and have a go at this quiz. So rather than just looking at individual sentences, you're going to have a look at a text that is all about conflict. And within this text, there are several language techniques being used. And you will have a couple of questions to answer on those language techniques. But don't worry, they are multiple choice. There are true or false ones. So it's not too taxing. So please have a go at that activity on Learn for me. Your tutor will be able to check the report and pull your score off for you. Once you have completed that task, you will need to come back to this Learn folder. And in the Learn folder, you will find a task that says Writing Task. This is the writing task. Okay, so you recently read an online article about the charity War Child and how they help young people affected by war and conflict. The writer would like to know your thoughts on charities and whether or not we should give money to them. Send an email to GemmaWoods@warchildwriters.com sharing your opinions on the matter. You could talk about whether you think we should donate money to charities, why you think or feel this way, and any experiences you have of helping charities in the past. Now, please remember, with any piece of work or writing that you do that is not directly recorded on Learn, we need to get that to our tutors. So either type this directly into an email and make sure it goes to your tutor, or if you can, access your notebook from Learn and type it directly into into your notebook via Learn. The notebook program is so important at the moment because we do need to keep a record of all the work you are doing, so we have evidence of how you are progressing and developing your skills, just in case we can't do exams. So please, please, please make sure that that work gets to your tutor. Once you have done that, at the bottom of your piece of writing, in bullet point form, I want you to, in your own words, explain what a language technique is. So we've been talking about them all day. What is it? What is a language technique? Please, in your own words, can you explain what that is? And underneath that, write down as many of them as you can remember. So particularly the ones from today. Write down as many as you can remember. Otherwise, thank you very much, ladies and gents. Remember, you can get hold of me at gabby.weaver@cwa.ac.uk, or you can message your tutor and you can get hold of us via Learn as well for any more information.